Welcome to the Sunday morning service of Brookhaven Church. It's July the 5th, and I just welcome you watching us together, worshiping together online. It was on March the 15th of this year that we first began to shelter in place. And for 11 weeks, from March the 15th until May the 24th, we worshiped together online just like this. And then on May the 31st, we were able to worship both in person and online. And then for the last 5 weeks, we've been worshiping both there at home, many of you, and here in the auditorium at Brookhaven Church together. But as you are very much aware, circumstances have changed and the COVID-19 positive cases have increased. And as a result of that, we just felt like that the wise and prudent course of action in order to keep you safe was that we would, for the month of July, we would go back completely online with both our worship services and all of our Bible studies and activities. And so I want to welcome all of you who are worshiping with us online today, and thank you for joining with us. I think this is going to be a really neat time together over the next several weeks. We've kind of got some special things planned that I think are going to be a really big blessing to your life. And so thank you for joining in. During this time that we're going to be not meeting in person again, then it's really important that we as a church just realize we're not on hold. We're not just treading water waiting till we can get back. The kingdom mission still goes forward. We still got to do what Jesus told us to do. So we just have to be creative in how we do it. And so one of the ways that we can continue to minister to one another is I hope that you will use the technology God has put at your disposal. Your email, your text messaging, your telephone, just all the different ways God has made available for you to contact people. You can keep up with people and love people and meet needs and encourage and pray, and there's so many things you can do. In addition to that, one of the things that we've been doing now for all these many weeks is I have been producing a daily 2-minute video of encouragement. And I email that or text that out to all who are signed up for it. And if you would like to be on that, not only will it be something that I think would be potentially an encouragement to you every day to help you start your day off focusing on the truth of God, but I'm hoping also that you will share those videos with others, that you will use it as an outreach and as a discipleship tool to just send it to someone. All it takes is 2.5 minutes, and to help them get focused on the Lord as well. So I need your help in doing that. If you're not receiving the videos, you can by just emailing the church. You can email our administrative assistant, Rachel, R-A-C-H-E-L, at brookhavenchurch.com. And just email Rachel and just say, I'd like to be on the daily videos. And she'll get you signed up and you'll start receiving them the very next day. And so I hope that you will do that. Also just want to continue to say to you, God bless you for your faithfulness and your generosity and your giving. Over these last several months, the Lord has just opened the windows of heaven and just poured out a blessing on us. And it has been more than enough to meet the needs of our church, but it has enabled us to meet the needs of others and to continue ministry and to give to missions and so many things. I'm going to be talking to you about an exciting ministry opportunity that God has opened up for us over the next several weeks. And I'll be talking about that next week. But I just want to thank you for your generosity. And I want to encourage you to continue to give. And you can do that online. You won't be able to give in person, obviously. So you can give online by going to brookhavenchurch.com/give. And you can just go right there. Or if you just go to our church web page, brookhavenchurch.com, there's a big just link for you to click right there, and you can give online. And I hope that you'll be faithful and that you'll do that, and so that God can continue to expand His kingdom literally around the world. And so thank you for that. Well, today is a special day. First of all, it's because this weekend we have been celebrating the 244th birthday of our wonderful nation. And so 244 years ago today, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. And 56 signers of that Declaration of Independence had pledged their life, their liberty, and their fortunes, and they laid it all on the line and took an incredible, courageous step by trusting and faith in God. They committed themselves to their Creator. And God, as a result of that, through many years of sacrifice and through the blood and through the lives of so many who've sacrificed for us, everyone watching me today that's a part of this nation has received the benefits of being born or living in this country. We are so blessed. We know that this country is not perfect. We got problems, and hopefully that you're praying and asking God to have mercy and grace on our land. But just because we have problems and we're not perfect does not mean that we should not be incredibly grateful for the freedoms and for the blessings that come to us by living in this great country. And we should never forget the sacrifice of those who have gone before us, who have handed down to us this wonderful land in which we live. And so happy birthday, America. But second of all, today is a very special day because on July the 5th, 3 years ago today, July the 5th, 2017, was the absolute first day of construction on this property that now houses our new building and the home of Brookhaven Church. 3 years ago today was the first blade of grass was removed and the first spade of dirt was turned and construction began. And over a year, during the course of the next year, we saw God do a series of incredible miracles. And so from July the 5th, 2017 until July the 8th, 2018, 1 year, 3 days later, we had the grand opening of our church. So 2 years ago this weekend, we had the grand opening of our church and we dedicated this building unto the Lord. And so I want you to join me in remembering right now what God did, those miracles that He did during the year of that construction. It is very important to remember. To remember what God has done in the past is so important for our spiritual lives. You see, one of the biggest problems we have, I think, as Christians, and one of the biggest problems we have in living a life of faith and trust in God is we have short memories. We so quickly forget the miracles that God has done in the past. We forget so often the answered prayers. We forget how many times God has come through for us over and over and over again in the past. That's not just true of our church, it's true of you and me as individuals. And the problem is that when we forget how faithful God has been in the past, then it really hurts our faith and our ability to trust Him in the present and our ability to entrust to Him our future and to believe that God is going to come through in the future. You see, God wants you and me to look at what happened to us, what He has done for us in the past, and God wants us to connect the dots. God wants us to go, well, if He did that for me in the past, and He's been faithful in the past, that is the guarantee He is going to continue to be faithful in the present and in the future. What you and I tend to do is we tend to want to take every crisis and every problem as though it is independent of each other. And so we tend to almost view it as though we're saying, well, yes, God did that in the past, but that is no guarantee that He's going to do it in the present, or how do I know that He will do it again? But over and over again, God, when He was dealing with the nation of Israel, He would often exhort them and encourage them and even rebuke them for forgetting their past. And He would always say to them, don't you remember what I did? And because their unbelief in the present was because they had forgotten what God had done in the past. In Psalm 106, there's a wonderful passage that reminds us of this truth about the nation of Israel. In Psalm 106, it says this, beginning in verse 7. When our ancestors were in Egypt, they gave no thought to your miracles. They did not remember your many kindnesses, and they rebelled by the sea, the Red Sea. Yet He saved them for His name's sake and to make His mighty power known. He rebuked the Red Sea, and He dried it up, and He led them through the depths as through a desert. He saved them from the hand of their foe, and from the hand of their enemy He redeemed them. The waters covered their adversaries, not one of them survived. Then they believed His promises, and they sang His praise. But they soon forgot what He had done, and they did not wait for His plan to unfold. And as you read on through Psalm 106, you see God just continues to recount through the psalmist how over and over again, through incident after incident, that God would come through for them in crisis, and then they would soon forget, and then they would go back to their unbelief. And this happened over and over and over again until finally, after a couple of years, they got to the brink of the promised land. You remember what happened? You remember how they sent 12 spies into the land that God had promised to them? And when the 12 spies came back, 10 of the spies said, you know, it is a good land, all right, just like God said. But man, there's giants in the land, and there's walled cities, and there are enemies that are opposing us. We cannot take that land. They looked at us like grasshoppers, and we saw ourselves like grasshoppers. We can't take this land. And they discouraged the people, and the people responded in unbelief. And finally, God had had enough. And so God said to them in Numbers chapter 14, He says in verse 20, they had rebelled against the Lord, and God was going to wipe them out. And Moses prayed for them, and God forgave them. And the Lord says in verse 20, I have forgiven them as you ask. Nevertheless, as surely as I live, and as surely as the glory of the Lord fills the whole earth, not one of those who saw my glory and the signs that I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, but who disobeyed me and tested me 10 times, not one of them will ever see the land that I promised on oath to their ancestors. No one who has treated me with contempt will ever see it. But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. You remember how when Israel was in bondage and in slavery in Egypt, how God did 10 mighty miracles to set them free. But then the moment they got free and they found themselves up against the Red Sea, here comes Pharaoh's army. What did they do? They started murmuring and complaining against the Lord. Oh, it would have been better if we had just stayed in Egypt. But God opened the Red Sea, and then he led them through the Red Sea. When Pharaoh's army tried to follow, they were destroyed. And then God leads them out into the desert. And then they hadn't been out there 3 days, and now they're whining and griping and complaining and saying it had been better if we'd have died in Egypt. Why'd you bring us out here to die in this desert? God begins to provide for their needs. So the Bible tells us that 10 times during this journey to Mount Sinai, they rebelled against the Lord and they reacted in unbelief. They could not make the connection that God kept coming through for them. And so after 10 times of responding in unbelief, then God finally said, enough. These people will never trust me. And so they missed out on what God had planned for them. You know, you and I have to be very, very careful that we don't do the same thing the nation of Israel did. You know, we're living in some uncertain times right now. We're living in some fearful times, some scary times. And I know that right now with this pandemic going around the world, particularly striking our country and our state and our cities around us, I know that for many people, they're afraid, they're wondering, will things ever get back to normal? Some are wondering about whether or not their business is going to survive. Some are wondering about whether or not they're going to have a job to go back to. Some are wondering about what their financial future is going to hold and all kinds of, are they going to make it physically? Are their families going to be okay? There's a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of frustration, maybe even anger, a lot of hostilities and division and all that's going on in our land, you know as well as I do. And so it is very important that we remember the faithfulness of God. Some people may be even worried about our church. Maybe you're worried and you're going, what's going to happen to our church if we're not meeting in person? Are we going to be able to hang together? Are we going to be able to make it? Are we going to be able to financially survive? What's going to happen? You know, our academy is way down in its enrollment right now because parents aren't putting their kids in the academy or any child care center right now. And so maybe people are worried about our church and wondering how we're going to do in the future. And so what I want to do is remind you today through our church, through the example of our church, that what God has done for us in the past, His faithfulness to us in the past, we need to remember so that we can remember that what God has done for us in the past is the absolute guarantee God is going to take care of us as a church right now in the present and in the future. But He's going to do the same thing for you. You need to remember. So I want to remind you today just something a little bit about our story of how we got here. You see, it was in 2012, our church was actually meeting in Farmers Branch. We were over 20 miles southwest of where we are today. We had been in Farmers Branch there at Marsh Lane and Valley View Lane for 16 years. We had moved there, relocated there in 1996. And so for 16 years, our church had faithfully served the Lord there, and we'd seen people come to Christ, and we'd seen miracle after miracle after miracle, but we were out of space, we were out of parking, and we didn't know what we were going to do. We were landlocked, we couldn't continue to grow where we were, and we had talked about relocating in the past, but nothing was really in the plans, and we had no real commitment to going forward of what we were going to do. And then it was in April of 2012, one day I'm sitting in my office at the church and the phone rang. And on the other end of the phone, a voice said, "We would like to buy your church." It turned out to be Royal Haven Baptist Church. And the voice on the other end of the line said, you know, our church is downsizing. We have a buyer for our property. We have an older congregation and we're looking for something smaller, more manageable for us, and we would like to buy your property. And I said, well, it's not for sale. We don't have it on the market or anything, But you know, we've talked about relocating in the past, and so why don't you come look at it? And if you're really serious, then I will bring up the conversation to the leadership of our church, and we'll begin to seek the Lord and just see if God is in it. Within a week, the pastor of the church, Brother Rick Dorman, came and met with me, handed me a letter of intent from Royal Haven Baptist Church. And as he handed me this letter, the promise that they were going to give to us, they were offering to pay us over $250,000 more than our property appraised for. And when Brother Rick gave me the letter, he said, Glenn, I just want you to know I'm giving you this to show you that we're serious. And there's actually going to be more where this comes from. He said, we're selling a much larger facility than yours, and we're going to get more money for it than yours is worth. But he said, I know that it takes money to relocate. And he said, we're going to come to your property. We're going to put a commercial elevator in here. We're going to have to build some ramps and do a few things. And then we're going to give you everything else from the proceeds of our sale. They wound up giving us $750,000 more than they had to, more than it was appraised for. And they did it as an investment in the kingdom of Christ. They did it as an investment for us. And God blessed those people that God invested in us through them. Well, I went to our church leadership and I began to talk to different ones individually. And I can assure you, I didn't have an agenda. I wasn't trying to talk anybody into it because this was not my idea. And so every time I would talk to someone and I'd say, well, here's what's happening, almost their first question would be, well, where are we going to go? And I'd say, well, I don't know. I don't have a plan. This is not, I'm not initiating this. And so, I'd say, we've thought about going out toward DFW Airport, and over again, our people, our leaders would respond and say, well, we could do that, but have you thought about going north, out toward Frisco, out toward McKinney? And I'd say, well, yeah, I mean, it's explosive growth going on out there, but that's over 20 miles. I don't know that you can move a church 20 miles. And so person after person would do that. Finally, in June of 2012, we had all the leadership, our staff and deacons were all together for our first meeting. Everybody was up to date on what was going on. And we sat in that meeting that night, and without knowing where we were going to go, we didn't know when we were going to go. We didn't know where we were going to go. We didn't know how much it was going to cost. All we knew was that we sensed that God was in it. And that night, those men made a step of faith. And they said, we believe God's in this and we need to go forward. And so in June of 2012, we made the commitment to go forward. We started looking for alternatives. Where could we go? We started talking to our church about it and saying to them, look, that we have no agenda except God's agenda. We're just going to seek the Lord together. We're going to keep you informed, and we're going to just seek the mind of the Lord together. And over the next number of months, that's what we did. And the church just sought the Lord. And one day, the phone rang. And I picked up the phone, and it was a phone call from a guy named David Craig. David Craig is the master developer of Craig Ranch, which is where we are, this master plan community. I didn't know David Craig, but David called and said, I hear that your church is looking for land. And I said, well, yes, it is. And he said, well, I have a gentleman that has a piece of property that has a balloon note coming due in 2 months, and he will sell it for half the appraised value. It turned out that it was to the penny what our deacons had said they felt like we ought to set aside for land. And so we came out and took a look at it, and it was a beautiful piece of property. It's not the one we're sitting on now. It was actually a piece of property over at Custer, just south of Stacy Road on Paradise Lane. There was 8 acres of land there, beautiful piece of property. But the problem was we couldn't afford the frontage. They were asking $17 a foot for the 3 acres across the front. So the 8 acres that they were offering to us was on the backside. Gorgeous piece of property, but we knew when we bought it that if we didn't get the frontage, that we would one day get blocked in. We would get, maybe they'd build a strip shopping center and nobody would know we were back there. But we had this sense that God was in this, and maybe one day he was going to open the door that we could buy the frontage. And so we took it to our church, and our church voted in August of 2012 overwhelmingly to sell their facility that was paid for there in Farmers Branch and to move out here and to buy this land and try to start a church out here. Many of the people who voted for that move told me, Glenn, we know God's in this, but we can't make the move with you. And they showed up that night on a Wednesday night in August, and they voted themselves out of a church. Those dear people took a step of faith and invested in you and I today. And so we bought the land, and we began to prepare to make the move out of the property in around January, just about 4 or 5 months later. The problem was we couldn't find anywhere to meet. We had just assumed that we'd meet in a school building up here somewhere. And the problem was that we found out that there's a rule that you can't lease the school buildings unless 70% of your congregation lives in the school district. Well, our people didn't live here. The majority of our people lived in North Dallas. And so we couldn't rent any of the schools in McKinney or Allen or Frisco or Plano or any of the schools around here. We had nowhere to go. We were literally down to just a few weeks before it was time to move out of our building in Farmers Branch, and we had nowhere to meet as a congregation. And one day, the phone rang, and a realtor on the other end of the phone said, I hear you're looking for a place to meet. He said, I know of a church that is meeting at a shopping center that might be willing to sublease to you. I called that church, and sure enough, they said, man, we would love if you would come in and take over this majority of this lease, then we'll move off Sunday morning and you can have it. And a few weeks later, our church moved into a shopping center that had been renovated and turned into a church, and we sat in chairs that we didn't own. There was a projection system, a sound system, a children's area, and we moved into an interim location designed for a church 1 mile from the property we had bought. Unbelievable, amazing provision of God just in the nick of time. Well, I was absolutely convinced that we would be able to get a loan and we'd start construction on our building very, very soon. Because after all, we had a piece of property that was probably worth $2 million, bought and paid for. We had $1 million in the bank left over from the sale of our property. We had an existing congregation with years and years of credit history, and we owed no money. And so I just thought, man, it would be a banker's dream. Was I wrong. We could not get a bank to even entertain the idea of giving us a loan. We hit closed door after closed door after closed door. I mean, one after the other. I cannot tell you how many hours Brother Mike Mossberg, our executive pastor, spent filling out paperwork and applying to banks. It was just unbelievable. One closed door after the other. We tried every creative thing you can imagine. We tried leasing our space and talking about all kinds of different creative ways to do this. No matter what we did, closed doors. And so what happened was, one day after 2 years of closed doors, one day the phone rings. And when the phone rang, it was a developer on the other end of the phone, and he said, I bought the land around your church property, and I would like to buy access across your property to the north side, to the street on the north side. And so I knew when he said he had bought the land around us, I knew right then that we were in trouble, that we were going to be blocked in. And so we said, well, would you like to buy it all? And so about a week later, he came back and said, yes, I would. And the church wound up making about $550,000 profit on that land. And so with that, we went back to David Craig and we said, hey, we like it out here. Do you have any other pieces of property that we could buy? And so he picks up the phone and he calls a gentleman and he says, James, do you have a place down there in that development at Ridge Road and Stacy where you could carve out some for a church? Well, it so happened that on this piece of property where we are now, the place where the high school is being built, where all the Beezer homes are being built, and where our church is, all of that was one big piece of property. And you had the high school, you had Beezer, and now you had us all trying to carve out pieces of that property, and they were trying to put that deal together all simultaneously. And so I talked to James Robertson, the owner, his company owned this property, and I said, man, we would really love the property there right at the corner of Ridge and Stacy. And so James kind of laughed at me and he said, well, I guess, sure you would. He said, but that's zone commercial. And he said, we're going to put, a restaurant like a Chick-fil-A or something there that's going to be really, really profitable. He said, but we'll give you the piece of property on the other end of the development, which was down on the McKinney Ranch side. Well, I thought, well, that's still really, really good. It's not quite as good as the Ridge Road side, but still really, really good. And so we agreed to that. And then a few weeks later, James comes back and he says, I'm sorry, you can't have that property down there because we didn't own as much of it as we thought we did. And so there's only one way in, one way out, and the city won't approve that. He said, so I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll give you the center section between Ridge and between McKinney Ranch. And he said, we'll give that to you. Well, not quite as good as either one of the other ones, but still really good. And so we finally said, okay. A couple of weeks later, he comes back and he says, I'm sorry, but Beezer doesn't want to give up that land. Well, I thought he was going to go, so I'm sorry, we can't work anything out. But instead, he said, would you have any interest in the corner at Ridge and Stacy? He said, I'll give that to you for the same price I was going to sell the other if you're interested. And I said, yeah, I think we're interested. And God opened up the door for us to buy this beautiful piece of property right here in the prime spot in this area. Amazing, unbelievable provision of God. Well, I thought, now we're ready. Now we found the right piece of property in the right spot with all the frontage and visibility. Now God's going to open the door. But another 2 years went by, closed door after closed door. We had tried everything we knew. We had explored every option we could think of, every avenue, and we had come up with zero. We could not afford it. And so about 2 days after we had sort of hit rock bottom, just all out of options, the builder calls us, the company that built our building. They called us and they said, you need to talk to this guy, Nelson Eagle. He has the financing. Nelson was a gentleman who had been in the child care industry for over 35 years at that time. Nelson, now today, he and his wife Nancy are members of our church. At that time, he's living in Denver, Colorado. He's got a child care center there in Denver and had been very profitable in helping a church there. And Nelson and I talked on the phone, and Nelson said, man, I've got the financing. The Baptist Foundation of New Mexico is looking for more projects like the one here in Denver. Within about 2 weeks' time, we're sitting down at the table with the Baptist Foundation of New Mexico, with the architects, with the builders, with all the players just around the table, and all of a sudden, this building just began to just grow, talking about a child care center and our church, and the building kept getting bigger and bigger. In a few minutes, when we got through, I looked at the Baptist Foundation and I said, look, I know you can't tell me that you're going to approve this loan, but if this is not even feasible, then just tell me now, because don't get our hopes up and then we get dashed. And the lady looked at me, and Miss Martha said, well, I just want you to know our comfort zone is probably about $7 million. And I real quickly thought, $7 million, we got $1 million in the bank, that will do it. And God opened the door, and within the next 12 weeks, we had been approved for the loan, and the construction began. And on July the 5th, 2017, construction began. And over that next year, an amazing, miraculous intervention, one after the other, God came through. I wish I had time to tell you about it, but God provided. And then on July the 8th, we dedicated this building, 2018, we dedicated this building to the Lord. I remind you of that story of God's miraculous intervention because I want you to know that God is the one who brought us here. This was all God's idea. And God has brought us here, and I want you to know that the God who faithfully provided for us and did miracle after miracle in the past is going to do it for us in the present. He's going to continue to work miracles for our church in the future. But the main reason I'm telling you this is because what is true of our church is true of you. It's true that God has faithfully taken care of you in the past, And if you will remember God's faithfulness, remember the answers to those prayers, remember how time and time again He came through for you. If you will remember what He did in the past, then you will have faith to believe that He's with you in the present and He's going to take care of you in the future. God, He says in His word in Philippians 1:6, He who has begun a good work in you will accomplish it until the day of Jesus Christ. In other words, what God starts, God finishes. God has begun a good work in you, and He is going to bring to pass everything He has planned. Over 40 years ago, I was pastoring a little country church in Grayson, Louisiana. And there were 4 of us in that little country church that got together, and we started singing, and we formed a quartet called the Crossroads Quartet. A couple of years into that, we recorded an album. And there was a song on that album that we sang that the song was, He didn't bring us this far to leave us. And so tonight, or today, as we get ready to conclude this time together, I want to leave you with that song. And so I want to play for you the song by the Crossroads Quartet. I'll be the one singing the lead on the song. And so I hope this blesses you and reminds you that God, who started a good work in you, will continue to do that good work and will take care of you all the way till you get home to be with God. He who started God's best work in you is going to complete it. You trust Him. Keep trusting in the Lord.
Didn't bring us this far to leave us. Didn't teach us to swim, to let us drown. Didn't build His home in us to move away. Didn't lift us up to let us down. There are some promises in a letter written a long, long time ago. They're not getting older, they're getting better, because He still wants us to know. Didn't bring us this far to leave us. Didn't teach us to swim, to let us drown. Didn't build His home in us to move away. Didn't lift us up to let us down. Didn't lift us up to let us down. Never use the word defeat. Claimed His promises, every one of them, and every spoken word He'll hear, because we're everything to Him. Didn't bring us this far to leave us. Didn't teach us to swim, to let us drown. Didn't build His home in us to move away. Didn't lift us up to let us down. Didn't lift us up to let us down. Didn't lift us up to let us down.